Hi, thank you for being here again this week. I'm not going to do a challenge session because I just don't have the time. My apartment's in a state of disarray because I'm leaving Colombia in 2 days. I have half-packed bags and boxes everywhere, and I've even had to move the camera so it's facing the corner because where the view normally is, it's terrible. I don't want you to see that. So I thought what I'd do today instead is a thought experiment. And the base concept of this thought experiment is that the mainstream, the cultural pillars, they will blow something up to a really big size to make it more believable. And this is a foundational tenet of propagandizing a society, is that the bigger the lie, the more likely it will be believed, because it's just like, wow, it's being inundated from every direction, it must be true. Because how could a lie be propagated to such an extent? And so I want to look at some of the events from recent history, some of the events from past history, and then look into the future using this idea of that's the tell. The tell is the bigger it is blown up by the media, the more likely that it isn't true. So the obvious one to start with is the pandemic. So for 3 years, it was the biggest thing on earth. And yet now we understand, as more information is coming out, that it was never as bad as they said it was. And also the things that they did, the mandates, the lockdowns, the masks, all of that didn't make an effect. And in fact, it actually destroyed lives, destroyed communities, destroyed economies, and so on. And now it's even looking like the virus itself was engineered in a laboratory. And we go back prior to that, we have J6. So J6 was an event that, again, was blown up. But as more information comes out, it's becoming clear that there were instigators in the crowd who were there deliberately to lead the charge, to incite all of the craziness. And then there are people who are in prison now and have been in prison for 3 years without trial because of something else which happened in the past, this sort of continuation of the agenda, this step by step. Now, I'll get to that in a moment. Then we look at Hussein and Gaddafi. So there was weapons of mass destruction, and also Gaddafi was a tyrant, and so he had to be removed because he was hurting his own people. But really what was going on is Hussein and Gaddafi both wanted to trade oil in a gold-backed currency which wasn't the US petrodollar. And that just wouldn't be tolerated by the oligarchs of the cabal. And so they took those guys out. Weapons of mass destruction were never discovered, even though we were promised that there's 100% verifiable information from the intelligence agencies. But no, it was all a lie. So we go back to 9/11, and we know from 9/11 that this was also not what they said it was. Yes, the towers came down. Yes, many people tragically lost their lives, but it wasn't what they said it was. It was a conspiracy to create an event to further the agenda. And this was my red pill moment, the 9/11, because I had a closer look at that, and because I totally bought in and I was fascinated by what had occurred. And so I looked in closer and closer and closer. And the closer I looked, the more I started discovering information which just didn't make sense with the story, until I got to the point where I realized, oh my goodness, this is all a lie. It was all staged. It is not what they say it is. And I thought, well, if that's not true, what else isn't true? And that's what begun my descent into the rabbit hole, to discover the truth of all the lies of our reality. And what came out of 9/11 was the Patriot Act. And the Patriot Act is meant to, keep Americans safe by having the right to arrest people, keep them imprisoned without trial, just because we feel they're a risk. And the J6 prisoners who are being imprisoned now for 3 years without trial are there under the provisions of the Patriot Act. Then we look at Tonkin Bay, which was the event which was the reason that the US entered the Vietnam War. But the Tonkin Bay event, we know now, wasn't a event that was staged or hyperbolized. It actually literally didn't occur. Nothing occurred. It was a total 100% fabrication. And it was the reason that the US entered the Vietnam War and many young men and women lost their lives. Then we go back and look at World War II. There's a lot of questions you can ask about World War II, but some of them are just too controversial to ask in a public video. But one that I think is pertinent is, Did the good guys actually win the World War II? Yes, good guys and women were fighting on behalf of their governments, but were they really fighting on behalf of the governments, or were they fighting on the behalf of oligarchical family dynasties, which are the heart and centre of the cabal that have been ruling everything for so long? I would argue it's the latter. And the reason that I say this is because when we look at our current world, where we have this idea that boys are becoming girls, girls are becoming boys, there's there's violence, there's crime, there's pollution of our food system, there's so many things are going wrong and crazy right now, but yet it has all arisen from the garden bed of the New World Order, which formed post-World War II. And so we're heading now to a New World Order, the fourth turning. But this period from World War II until we arrive there has all grown from the garden bed of the New World Order, which arose from the restructuring of the geopolitical state of the globe post-World War II. Then we look at the Great Depression. Was the Great Depression really something which has happened as a consequence of the macroeconomic forces which were beyond the control of those who have their hands on the instruments of control? I would argue that the Great Depression was intentional. It was intentional to transfer a whole bunch of wealth and power and authority from the hands of the people into the hands of the centralised banking oligarchs. And my reasoning for that is that the Federal Reserve Act was passed in 1913. And prior to that, the right to print money had belonged to the Treasury. But then it was transferred to the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is a centralised banking system that's privately owned. So every single dollar which is put into the US economy must be borrowed first from the centralised banking system, the Federal Reserve. But it's not federal, it doesn't have any reserves, and it's not even part of the US government. You're not even allowed to audit that institution. It's privately owned by the oligarchical families that control it all. So how did it come to be? Well, prior to the Federal Reserve Act in 1913, there was the Titanic. And you've got to wonder, how is the Titanic associated? But using this principle of the tell, what boat sinking from history can you tell me is as big as far as like the iconic cultural phenomenon as the Titanic? There's nothing. It was a boat that sank. Boats sink every single day. Yet that boat is incredibly Titanic across the world. Why? Well, that boat was owned by J.P. Morgan. And J.P. Morgan is the guy who owns J.P. Morgan banking cartel. And he was also one of the founding members of the Federal Reserve. And he had, those who were behind the Federal Reserve Act, they had opposition. They had very powerful people who were saying this is a bad idea because it will give too much power to a small group of people who could then just basically destroy the economy and enslave everybody. So we shouldn't do it. J.P. Morgan invited those people as free guests on the maiden voyage of the Titanic. And then the idea was they were going to debate this idea over the course of the cruise. But then the morning of disembarkation, J.P. Morgan contacted them and said, look, I've come down with something, I'm not well, I'm not going to be able to make it, so we'll have to do the debate sometime in the future. But in the meantime, enjoy the cruise at my expense. And of course it sank, and all of the opposition to the Federal Reserve that actually had some influence and could have derailed it went down with the ship. And then the Federal Reserve Act was passed without any opposition. And then shortly after that, there is the Great Depression. Everybody loses all their money, and all of the small mom and pop corner store banks went under and were bought up by the larger institutional banks which were affiliated with the central banking system, the Federal Reserve. So it was staged. And you can go back, you keep going back in history, and there are also certain moments within that sort of historical landscape I just gave you, which also are iconic to the degree where they should be looked at with a high degree of suspicion. So if we do full circle now, and we come back to the present day. And so we're now on the verge of a currency collapse. And you've got to ask yourself, is this again something which is just the result of macroeconomic forces which are beyond the control of those who have their hands on the instruments of control? Or has it been deliberately built up over the last few decades so that there will be an absolute collapse, and then that will provide the justification for the fourth turning, the next New World Order, which will be the digital ID, the central bank digital currency system, and a social credit score. Of course, that's why it's actually happening. And so to use this information, you want to prepare yourself so you've got an off-ramp. And that off-ramp is that you get into alternative assets like gold, like silver and so on. I mean, I'm not an expert, but this is something for you to research, but it's something that I've been doing. I've been preparing myself in this way. Then the idea is there's going to be another pandemic. If there is going to be another pandemic, and Bill Gates is saying, yes, it's going to be even worse than COVID was, you've got to ask yourself, why is that so? How can that be that there's another one when in my lifetime, up until 3 years ago, there'd never been one? And now we're talking about a second one that's going to be worse. So if it ever occurs, my immediate suspicion will be, this isn't real. It's not occurring the way that it is. All of the measures they say they want to do aren't justified, because now the WHO treaty, which has been ratified by a whole bunch of countries, says that if there is another pandemic, that each country will cede their authority to the WHO. And then the WHO will then dictate how each country responds to the pandemic. And so there'll be a single centralised authority controlling all of the nations that have ratified this treaty. And so, of course, it's in their interests, the cabal who are controlling the WHO, it's in their interests that there is another pandemic, so that then they have the reason to then assume control of the planet. And then the final one I'm going to mention is aliens. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but when you think about, they're laying the narrative now. So now there are little bits of information they're putting out. So for the longest time, the government authorities denied the existence of aliens. Yet now they're even coming out, the institutions are coming out and saying that they have seen craft which are not Earth in origin. They're literally saying they're aliens. They're showing us footage which has been captured by military aircraft and saying, what we have on the screen here, this doesn't appear to be a vehicle of Earth origin. So they're saying it. Why now? After denying us for so long, why now are they planting these little seeds here, there, or there? I say because they're building a narrative. They're laying the foundation so that when the time is right for them, there will be some type of alien event, whether it will be first contact communication with aliens or an alien attack or something, which again would be a great justification to get the world to unify into a single group with a centralised body controlling everybody, because that's what's necessary to fight this new enemy which has come from outside of the Earth. And in the current environment, if that was to occur, then those who would be anointed as the, sort of the authority which controls everybody, they're not going to be the good guys. They're just not. I think we all can agree that that isn't going to be the case. So, using all this information, this way of thinking, going forward, when something starts cresting the horizon, be suspicious by default. Your initial, the way you receive that information is that you're skeptical that it's true. And as it gets bigger and bigger, the more that it blows up, the more that it becomes something in the mainstream, then the more that your skepticism and suspicion, in my opinion, should increase. Because that's the tell. The bigger it is, then the more likely it is of fabrication. Okay, so I just wanted to leave you with that. That's just kind of the way that my cynical and suspicious mind works. And that's just a result of awakening and just discovering so many lies that it's actually, you're more likely to be right if you assume that it's a lie. And the next 3 weeks, I'm going to be traveling, and I've got 5 flights through 4 countries. And this is going to mean that I'm probably not going to be able to do my channeling as normal. But what I hope to do is just pop in for a short conversation like this one, give you an update on how things are going. And then once I have arrived, I will then move into permanent accommodation, I hope by May 12, and I will recommence the regular channelings, and also that's when we will commence the How to Channel course. So that course then will close the enrolment, and the 50% pricing will be over. But I'll give you fair warning. So if you're still thinking that you're going to get in there before that happens, I'll give you a warning. I'll say, look, in 1 week from now, I'm going to close that pricing. And if you want to do it in the future, you'll have to pay like double or at least 50% more. So I'll keep you updated on all of that. But until the next time I see you on the road, and then again when I'm in my final location, I wish you the best. I hope that you are happy and everything is going well. And tell you that I love you, and I'll see you again soon. Bye.